round two of the Idaho 5 for 5 Soil Health Roundtable. My name is Sean Neild. I'm the state soil scientist for NRCS Idaho. And we're glad that you've been able to tune in today. We've got an excellent lineup, some great presenters, great diversity of topics. This format is a little bit different than what we had last time. This is a webinar format, so attendees are muted, but you can enter questions into the Q&A box, and we will have a discussion session after the presenters have presented. So please don't be shy. Enter those questions. We'll keep track of them. We'll address them as best we can and as best as the panelists can. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking. I think we should get straight to presentations here. So one last thing. I've got with me as hosts here, I've got Jackie Jameson helping me out, and she's with the U of I Extension and NRCS partner position, and Marlon Winger, our point of contact for the Soil Health Division. He's a regional soil health specialist. Okay, let's let her rip. I think we're starting with Jen.
Hi there, Sean. It's great to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm actually pulled off on the side of I-84 near Kimberly, Idaho, which turns out to be one of my new study sites. So I apologize if there's any truck traffic going by, but it sure is a beautiful day. It's great to be on here with some folks that I know, including Marlon, who I still will remember is just giving one of the best presentations I've ever seen on soils and soil health back a couple years ago in Boise. And Zena, who I've had the pleasure to work with the Friends of the Teton River. Sean has been a huge resource to me and to my students as I learn about soils and how important they are on our landscapes. So I'm going to try to go ahead and share my screen here. Just a second. So
I think I've got you set up if you want me to just forward through your slides.
Oh, sure, that would be great. That would be great. That would be easier. So go ahead and share this. And while Sean is getting up that presentation, just wanted to tell you just a little bit about who I am. So I'm at Boise State, and I am a geomorphologist. So my research interests have really been in wildfires and fire-related erosion, relationships between fires, climate change, and vegetation change over short and long time scales. So kind of yesterday's fires and fires that happened 10,000 years ago. Over the past about, 6 or 7 years now, I've really gotten interested in soils and carbon storage. So working out in Reynolds Creek out in the Owyhees was a project that I'm still involved with the National Science Foundation and with the ARS folks out there. And a new study that I've started both in Reynolds Creek and in Kimberly, Idaho. So this, my title, Soils Are a Solution, Carbon Storage in Western Rangelands and Agricultural Sites. And so since I did, kind of happen to pull off in this farm field, just showing you a look around here outside of Kimberly, Idaho on a beautiful day. And I think the main point I have here is that, our soils are so important for so many reasons, as we all know. That's why we're here. But there also can be an important solution to climate change, where the more carbon we can store in our soils and the less carbon we have in our atmosphere, the better for our planet. So you can go ahead and advance the slide, Sean. As you may have heard this famous quote from FDR, "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." And there's some, again, I think some great resources. Dave Montgomery, who's another geomorphologist, in his book Dirt, was a real influence for me. So I'd recommend reading that. It gets into the longer term history of different civilizations and the importance of soil to, of course, to our growing of food and to our survival. You can go to the next slide. And I think recently, among the geoscience community and among the climate change science community, we've really realized that soils can be a solution to not only getting the carbon out of the atmosphere, but a win-win solution where we have more organic rich soils that produce higher yields in our agricultural settings and maybe decrease our need for expensive fertilizers and other additives. So I think that's a real exciting solution. The other thing I've observed firsthand is that the next generation of farmers on our landscapes are really interested in this. And so keeping Idaho kids on Idaho farms, I think, by saying, hey, this is a real win-win for the planet is a great solution. All right, next slide. So talking a little bit about my new National Science Foundation project, what I'm doing is examining links among carbon, nutrients, and water cycling in dryland ecosystems. So my focus here, two areas, Reynolds Creek, Idaho, and Kimberly, Idaho. Next slide. I'm doing this in collaboration with a great group of scientists from the University of Texas, El Paso, New Mexico State University, Boise State University, and the University of Wyoming. And our collaborators at the USDA ARS offices in Kimberly and in Boise are, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all the work that they've been doing really for decades on our landscapes to understand both our agricultural areas and our rangeland settings. And this photo in this picture is actually down from the New Mexico site. All right, next slide. So a lot of us know about organic carbon. You know, that's of course the good dark black gold in our soils that helps support our soil ecosystems. I'm actually interested in inorganic carbon. So you can go to the next slide. This is a photo of my soils class that I took right before COVID last year. You can see everyone's all happy. They don't have their masks on. And that big red arrow is pointing to a real prominent layer of soil inorganic carbon, which many of us might refer to as caliche. You might have a few choice curse words for it if you're trying to dig a post hole out in these areas. So this is white calcium carbonate, and it accumulates over time in our dryland soils. And this site right here that you can see here is right outside of Boise on the about a 500,000-year-old Gowan Terrace site with a real beautiful stage 5K horizon for those of you who care about such things. So, all right, next slide. So again, our work in Reynolds Creek really builds on previous work that I've done with folks from Idaho State University, the ARS out there, and a lot of work from my former student, Chris Stanbury. So what Chris did is he went out to Reynolds Creek for his master's thesis and dug, I don't even want to know how many soil pits, and took soil cores to measure how much inorganic carbon we found out here. And I won't go through all of his thesis work, but just a little bit. So next slide. What he found was that when you get above about 500 millimeters of precipitation, you just don't have that soil inorganic carbon. There's too much water and it flushes out of the system. But in our lower elevation drier sites, we do have a substantial amount of carbon storage as inorganic carbon on our landscape. And that's just showing some of his results in Reynolds Creek. That's the outline of Reynolds Creek with the higher elevation perimeter of the watershed where we didn't find, you know, any inorganic carbon, down to our lower elevation sagebrush steppe sites where we have, in some cases, a considerable amount of carbon. And this, again, when we translate this worldwide to our global carbon storage, is an important storage of carbon on our landscapes. All right, next slide. And this just shows that, again, I want to make sure I'm afraid I'm going over time, so I'm going to keep going a little bit faster. Showing no inorganic carbon in our high elevation sites on the map on the left, kind of that variability in the middle, and then how much we have on our landscapes. So next slide. Now to Kimberly, Idaho, and this is Dave Bjornberg here in the foreground, right near where I am right now. Now we're interested in looking at how much carbon is stored in these agricultural sites. And I have to say, I wasn't expecting very much inorganic carbon because a lot of these fields are irrigated way in excess of 500 millimeters a year for corn and other water intense crops. But surprisingly, this is not what we found. So next slide. Initial results from some of my students' work shows that there's actually quite a bit of inorganic carbon in these soils. And we think this is because the irrigation water contains a lot of calcium. So it's kind of hard water, irrigation water from the Snake River. And that these agricultural sites may also be really important areas for storing inorganic carbon. So we're excited to keep going with this project. All right, next slide. I also just wanted to highlight, again, Sean has helped a lot with this. This is my kid who is at this point in second or first grade. How do we get our kids to really appreciate Idaho's soils? And I'd say more hands-on education. And that's another big part of this NSF project is education and outreach, especially to some of our underrepresented communities. So I'm really excited about this hands-on soils education. Next slide. And if you're interested in either soils education, global change education, or wildfires, let me know. My email's there at the bottom. I've got a monthly meeting with the Idaho Climate Literacy Education Engagement and Research Group, and we really would like to hear more from the agricultural communities about what you need and how we can help. So thanks so much to Sean for organizing this wonderful series, and I'm really excited to hear from the rest of you today. So thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. Appreciate all the work that you're doing, really. Jackie, I'm going to get this video queued up here.
And Sean, are you going to take questions kind of at the end, or should we plan?
Yes, at the end we'll have we've got a Q&A and chat box for attendees, and then we will be fielding those questions at the end as best we can.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to mute myself.
You bet. All right, let's see if I can get my act together here. Cooper Brossy was unable to be here in person today. And so he, through the kindness of his heart, shared a video, and we'll see if I can share it with you. Coming through. Let's see if this, hey, Cooper.
Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for attending today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but Sean and I worked out a way for me to share my slides and record what I might want to share with you. And now you can get the chance to see what we've been up to on our place. So my name is Cooper Brossy. I farm with my dad, Fred, at Ernie's Organics outside Shoshone. We've been certified organic since 1996 and farming our place for over 30 years. I wanted to take a few minutes today to share with you some trials we did on a silage corn polyculture project. But before I get too far, I definitely need to acknowledge Clayton Neviker from Northwest Seed and Jed Bateman from AgriSource, who this year, just like every other year, are willing to support the crazy ideas that my dad Fred and I come up with, and hold our hand as we try some things that some folks are not so happy about trying on their own without a lot of help. So we're happy to have the help. You know, like anything, things we do require some collaboration and community and sharing. So the intent today is just to share what we've done. You know, we've seen some other corn projects in past sessions, 5 for 5 sessions and other soil health sessions. But this year we had a little more data than normal, so I just wanted to share that with everyone and hopefully generate some discussion. Our goals for this project were to test the overall silage yield on 22-inch versus 44-inch row spacing, having the same plant population per acre. So we would basically skip a row in the 44-inch treatment, and then tighten up the plant spacing. So we were trying to establish a multi-species cover crop to grow alongside the corn throughout the growing season and then in through after harvest through the winter. So this is in order to keep a living root in the soil through the winter into the spring and have some cover crop in the spring, hopefully suppressing weed growth throughout the growing season and maybe providing a post-harvest grazing opportunity. Just to fill you in on the history of this field, it was in alfalfa for 4 years, then we planted beans, and then we planted winter wheat followed by a cover crop. Then went back to beans with another cover crop after harvest, and then in 2020 we planted this corn, which was a Blue River variety, number 14A91. So we planted the corn in early June. It came up okay, given the cool spring we had. On June 20th, when the corn was about V3 to V4 stage, we tried to plant via airplane this cover crop mix you see on the screen. And we wanted to get it in earlier than previous years. We've done this so that we could really try to get it going quicker, get this cover crop established, and head off any weeds that might be coming. So we planted red clover, Volana vetch, a couple ryegrasses, forage rape, and buckwheat. You can see in the little red circles, tiny weeds are coming, and that's going to be a factor later on. You know, we're trying to get ahead of the weeds here, so we cultivated, and then we flew on the seed with an airplane, and then turned the pivot on. And 5 days, no, let's see, 8 days after flying the seed on and cultivating, this is what it looked like. So on the left, you have the 22-inch rows, and on the right, the 44-inch row spacing. You'll see on the right, there's a lot more plants per row foot. We have a plant, you know, every 3-ish inches or so, and on the left, a plant every, you know, 7 to 8 inches or so. So the plant populations were, you know, in strict sense, 36,000 on the 22-inch side. And how we tricked up the planter to jump up the plant population, the settings ended up being about 80,000. So that's why the plant spacing is so tight. It's probably a little bit too much. We tried to just double it to be, you know, closer to 70,000 or so, but we just couldn't quite make it work in the planter. We just had too many weeds coming, unfortunately, even though we had some cover crop coming up. So on July 5th, we flew on another mix, and we upped the clover, vetch, rape, and buckwheat amounts by 50%, kept the grasses the same, and the corn looked like that at that day, and we cultivated that in again and killed the weeds that were coming. On July 27th, that's what it looked like. So on the right again, the 44-inch spacing rows. You can see a lot of greens coming up in between the rows. Unfortunately, some of that is broadleaf weeds. You can see here again on the right photograph on July 27th shows a lot of broadleaf weeds coming. But you can see also, can you see my mouse there, Sean?
Yep.
So you can see some Nebraskas here in the wide row. They're doing pretty well. There's some right here, some right here. There's some clover here in the middle. We've got some vetch right there, another brassica, and the grasses are doing fairly well in the wide row setting. In the narrow row, we have less broadleaf weeds, or maybe they're just smaller, like here, 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 and you know here. But we do have some grass, and we have some more vetch. There's some clovers down here. So things to note are how much more damp the ground surface is here because of the shading, and sort of more spindly the cover crop and weeds are relative to the more wide open spacing in the 44 inches, and some drier ground here. So on September 28th, we chopped it off. That's what it looked like. You can see on the left, there's a little more opportunity for grazing maybe than on the right side. And of course, the truck traffic kind of beats things up, so it's a little misleading maybe. That's looking the other direction from the top of the hill. Again, on the right side, the 44-inch rows are here. So there's a lot more green over there, even if some of those are weeds, unfortunately. Here's what it looked like this week. Again, you can see a lot of this skeletal weed matter on the right where we had the 44-inch rows, and a lot more bare ground over here on the left with the 22-inch rows. When we zoom into that, you can see there are some differences here. Again, we have bare ground, and on the south-facing slopes of these hills, and better coverage of organic matter and soil armoring on the north-facing slopes. Stands to reason. If you zoom in, you can see again that the red circles are where we have weeds coming. Mostly these are purple mustard, which is a problem in this field. The red squares are where we have cover crop that's kind of died down and gone dormant. But we're hoping that in the next month it'll come back to life, and we'll get some solar energy captured and be pumping some carbon in the ground. We didn't end up getting any cows on this, but we have had a lot of grazing by deer, which you can see the evidence for right here. On the left slide, you can see here's some clover, but these other squares are pretty much ryegrass. So the brassicas, of course, winter killed, and we're just left with clover and the grasses. Moving quickly to our results, the total tons on the 22-inch side yielded better than the 44-inch side. You can see about a 3-ton difference there. We did this by clipping and weighing 5 different test strips in each treatment side. So there's a fair number of data points behind each of these averages. We also sampled the silage for quality, and that's courtesy Northwest Seed and Clayton. So just going quickly through these, and I'll caveat that I'm no dairyman and I don't know a lot about all this, but from what I understand from people who are smarter than me, the 22-inch rows showed that they were more mature, they were more dried down, and relative to the 44s, they had lower lignin, which means that material is more digestible. They had higher starch, which provides more energy to the feed. The TDN number is higher as well on the 22-inch side. The milk pounds per ton of dry matter, so how many pounds of milk supposedly the cow can generate based on feeding a ton of that is higher, about 109 pounds on the 22-inch side. So that might not sound like a lot, but in a big pile of silage that adds up, over the course of a couple months when it's being consumed. So moving quickly to lessons learned, we've reestablished again, proved to ourselves again that we need low weed pressure for a good cover crop mix. This particular mix didn't suppress the weeds so much, but it did keep up with them and grow along with them. The fall grazing in 44-inch wide rows is possible. Spring growth and grazing opportunity there is to be determined. We're just not sure quite how that'll work out. But something that we haven't quantified, which I'd like to spend time on, is what are the subsurface interactions of all these different species, in the root zone with the different soil microbiology that we have present. So thanks very much. I've gone through this really quickly and I've already exceeded my time. So I want to pause now. And if you have questions, please include them in the chat. Maybe you guys can work them out on your own. And if anything can't be resolved, please let me know, and you can contact Sean and he can contact me. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Cooper. Really appreciate you doing this.
You're very welcome.
All right. I will stop sharing. I think that's really cool that Fred and Cooper have done those trials and kept such good track of their numbers, and hopefully folks have got there's some discussion around that. It was an excellent presentation, a little over time, but excellent presentation. All right, Jackie, what do we have coming up next here?
It looks like we're on to Zena, talking about the Upper Snake River Farms and Fish Program.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for organizing and thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen, hopefully quickly. Okay, can you see my screen? Yep, okay. Great, so my name is Zena Wolcott. I work for Friends of the Teton River up here in Driggs, Idaho. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Upper Snake River Farms and Fish Program. And so this is a collaborative effort between a number of different partners. But right now, I'm going to talk mostly about the work that Friends of the Teton River and the Henry's Fork Foundation have done. And so, so the Farms and Fish program began back in 2016, and it really was started a group of agricultural producers, water managers, local nonprofits all came together to essentially address soil health concerns and water quality and water quantity concerns here in Teton Basin. And they came together really with the belief that well-managed family farms, working lands, and conservation can and in fact should go hand in hand. And so how it works is the Farms and Fish program, essentially FTR, Friends of the Teton River, and the Henry's Fork Foundation leverage state and federal and private dollars, so in the form of grants or private donations, to provide grower payments to reduce the risk associated with a grower adopting a new practice that is intended to improve soil health on their land. As well as some grower payments, there's also funding in there for soil health monitoring, and then ideally support as well, and creating a community of like-minded people that can share what they've learned. And so this program is, all of the work that's done on the ground is producer-led, and they're voluntary agreements. And so the producer comes up with what they want to do. Generally, the projects are intended to address a resource concern that the producer is interested in addressing. So today I'm just going to share two projects that we have provided support for. And these are both cover crop related projects. Here in the Teton Basin, we have an incredibly short growing season. It is not uncommon for us to have a killing frost, you know, every month out of the year. July and August are less likely, but it's certainly possible. So here there's a lot of interest in introducing or including cover crops into some sort of cropping system, but there's certainly some challenges with such a short growing season. And the two projects that I'm going to share today are both based in the Teton Basin, but because that's where I work and I'm most familiar with, but this program has expanded to sort of the Upper Snake, so along the South Fork of the Snake, as well as the Henry's Fork, so up north. So we have expanded the program area a little bit since these two projects. So the first one that I just want to share is a full season cover for forage. So this is PK land and cattle. And so they transitioned 120 dryland acres of barley to a cover crop mix for forage. And so their goals were to increase plant diversity and then also to trial a full season cover crop for forage. That wasn't something that Robert and Morgan, who are in this picture here, had tried before. And so they seeded the cover crop, which you can see behind Morgan. They seeded it the first week of May, and they tried 6 different cover crop mixes ranging from 5 to 11 species mix. And then they started grazing this in mid-July, and they moved 170 cow-calf pairs across this 120 acres with daily moves. So cows were generally getting 4 to 5 acres a day. And so you can see that right behind Morgan, so that's the piece. This picture was taken, I want to say, in mid-August. And so they had pretty good growth on the cover crop. And a couple of things that at the end of the season, I think, you know, Robert and Morgan shared with us is that they thought that the 5-way species mix for the cover crop was maybe just as good as the 11-way mix. Obviously a little bit less diversity, but it was cheaper. It was probably $6 an acre. I think it was $6 an acre cheaper for the seed cost. And they felt as though it generated just as much above ground biomass. And then the other thing that they mentioned was they would have started grazing sooner. They didn't quite make it all the way across the 120 acres before the final sort of chunk of land was a little bit too mature for grazing. So Overall, I think this project, I would say, I think classified it as a success. They certainly learned some things. And then this pasture is now, they planted it into a perennial forage. So diverse species mix for perennial forage. And so the next project was at Penfold Farms. And these guys wanted to try a fall seeded cover crop, so post cash crop harvest. And so they had 150 acres of barley that was harvested, and then they seeded radish and turnip cover just after the barley was harvested. So their goals also were to increase plant diversity and then trial cover crop seeding post cash crop harvest in a zone with a really short growing season. So they seeded this cover crop in mid-September after the barley was harvested. They irrigated it, and after the straw was baled, and they irrigated it once. And you can see in the picture, this picture, so if they seeded it in mid-September, I want to say this picture was taken in mid-October. And so there was very little germination and tiny plants going into the winter. So I think that the Penfolds would probably say that it did not feel like a success, really, with pretty poor germination and not much plant growth. But I think a couple of things that they learned, they were working with a custom harvester here, and so they had to wait until the straw was baled to get their cover crop seed on. So they probably could have seeded it. I want to say they harvested the barley off this piece the end of August, so they probably were 2 weeks behind seeding the cover crop. So figuring out a way to get the seed on as fast as possible if they're trying to do a post cash crop cover. And they also learned that the cover crop didn't winter kill. I think maybe what had germinated did winter kill, so it didn't make it through the spring. But once spring came around, they had a really great stand of radishes and turnips, for better or worse, that maybe didn't germinate in the fall, but germinated the following spring. And so they had hoped to, I think, do a no-till quinoa on this piece of ground, which I think they abandoned that plan once they realized how much radish and turnip had overwintered or had seeded in the spring. And so while they maybe wouldn't classify this project as a success for the first year, I think there are certainly some good lessons learned, and they are curious about continuing to try some post-cash crop cover crop seeding. And so those are just two examples of projects that the Upper Snake River Farms and Fish Program has worked on. If you are a grower in the Upper Snake region and you're interested in trialing some sort of project that will improve soil health on your operation, our contact is Daniel Wilcox. I think he might be on this call as well. But he's the Farms and Fish Program Manager, and his email and phone number are there. You can reach out to him directly. If you want more information just about the program, my contact information is there as well. You're welcome to send me an email or give me a phone call. That's it. Thank you all for having me.
Zena, thank you so much. And just a reminder for folks, if you have questions for the presenters or things that you'd like to bring up, you can feel free to enter those in the question and answer box. So next up we have Brian Kossman, and he will be talking about winter stockpile grazing. So Brian, you can go ahead and take it away. Brian, it looks like you're still muted if you want to unmute yourself. Brian?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Hey, okay. I think I can basically echo what Zena had to say about. Can you see my screen now? Can Can everybody see my screen?
I cannot see your screen. Did you try sharing your screen at the bottom?
Yeah. Maybe Sean, you want to back me up here?
Yeah, I can.
Do you
I can
have
do
that
that.
loaded still?
You bet.
Thanks, Sean.
Not a problem. Let me fire it up.
But anyways, so I can probably back up a lot of what Zena had to say about that timing issue of behind a cover, putting a cover crop behind a cash crop, and how important it is to get that seeded as soon as possible. It was one of our biggest challenges. We've had it work both ways. We've had it be stuff get seeded early and it turned out terrific. The stuff gets seeded late and it turned out about like that one did. But anyways,
Okay. Does that show up?
yep, I can see it.
Okay. You just just say
So,
next when you need me to go.
Okay, so basically what we did, and I can I could probably throughout, this is just one fall worth of one thing we did on our farm, and it was in 2019 and into January of 2020, and so I think I can probably tell you more about what we did wrong than what we did right. But I mean, I guess that's what the thing about it is. We can, and we're going to do that again this fall, and so we're already feel like we've learned a few things. But so we had a winter barley crop, and we seeded what we were going for is something that was soil health benefit and something that was going to give us some good grazing. We wanted to put some stocker calves out on it and keep them throughout the fall and into the winter and try to sell them in early part of January, because usually here in the southern part of Idaho where we're at, we usually don't get a lot of snow, or at least snow that sticks around until after Christmas. So we usually can take things into the fall pretty good. And so we planted behind this winter barley crop, and we had the volunteer barley, of course, that came back, but we also added teff, ryegrass, some millet. So these are some warm season grasses, and some rutabaga and turnips and radishes and mustard for brassicas. And one thing that was a challenge for us was that in 2019, that winter barley actually got froze in June. It got froze twice, and it hurt the barley pretty good yield wise, but it also actually kind of stunted it and pushed harvest back at least a week. So we feel like we could have got this. Sometimes we can get that fall barley harvested in July and still get cover crop on like the last couple days of July, which is just kind of ideal for us. But this time it didn't happen until the 11th of August. And so 10, 11 days in August, you just lose so many BTUs right there that we kind of feel like we got off to a late start to begin with. But next slide. And so by September 20th, you can see the picture on the left, what this was starting to look like, and it was really starting to look really pretty good. And here's the other thing that we probably did wrong, or I know we did wrong, is it was our first year buying stocker calves, and I think we very naively thought, well, we'll just go out in August and we'll just go buy some stocker calves, and that's probably a little naive around here to think that you can just go get them. And when it come time to buy some calves, there wasn't any calves to be found. And for one, in 2019, we had a really good spring. There was a lot of grass in the pastures. And so even guys that grazed some desert ground, which we hope to buy those calves, they were still out grazing those calves. They had a lot of feed. And so they weren't as easy to find as we thought they were. And so we think we'll be way out ahead of that this go around. We're actually kind of looking for calves right now for this fall. So bottom line was we didn't get some calves bought and put out onto this field until like October 20th. You can see on the 15th of October there, I had my kids out helping me build the perimeter fence. And here's just keep adding to the things that went wrong. And in 2019, if you recall, middle of October, we got some really, really hard frosts. In fact, we had to shut down sugar beet harvest for 2-3 days. Some of the beets got really froze, and you can see what this cover crop looks like. It kind of took a beating right then. That grass was really laying down, got froze right then. So it wasn't the end of the world, but still we were already, the cards were starting to stack against us. So go to the next slide, please, Sean. So we finally get these cattle out here, and the picture on the right, you can see it's a little later, but I don't know how many of you guys can see this very well, but we put an electric fence on the pivot, and that's how we were doing some intensive grazing and moving the fence every day. As I put a fence around the perimeter of this pivot, and then one going to the center on the previous slide where you see me and the kids are building a fence that stayed up permanently. And then we attached one to the pivot, and we just started working, just letting them on to a little bit more about every 3 days. And so it was working pretty well. And these cattle were doing really good while it was still warm. And you could watch, just look at them and know that they were doing pretty good, watching them grow out there. But I really feel like we should have had cattle on this field middle of September. I feel like we lost probably at least 5 weeks of some of the premium weight gain that we could have put on those calves right then. So as time went on, the frost and the cold kept beating this cover crop down, and we did, as we selected the varieties, we did really try to select varieties of cover crop that would still remain palatable after it was froze, and still retain more feed value after it was froze. And so I think we were kind of still there a little bit, but I know that the more time went on, the early frost hurt us. The getting the cattle on late hurt us. Go ahead and switch slides, Sean, please. So here's as we went on, time went on. In December, it still actually kind of stayed a little bit mild after we had those early frosts that really burned things down. Actually, November and December were just a little bit better. But you can see they sorted through this stuff pretty good. And in the picture, maybe it's a little hard for you to see, but they would eat the radishes and the turnips off right to the ground. And then in the picture, I was hoping you could see the warm season grasses that we planted. Because it got cold so soon, they just really didn't do as well as we'd hoped. But some of the finer stemmed stuff in the picture, the larger stuff is the volunteer barley, but the finer stem stuff is the teff and the ryegrass, and the millet really didn't do well either. But it was still there, and you can. Now, one thing I told Sean was I do think there was some value, and I think I would still keep that in my cover crop mix, because I think with some more BTUs in the fall, if we get things planted right, we're going to get more out of that. but I also think that having the extra plants per square foot and stuff, I think it helped me in the spring, because the ground, when we went to sugar beets the next year, the ground was so mellow, and you could find the little remnants of those little tiny grass plants out there. And I think when we worked this field ahead of the sugar beets, it really helped keep that soil structure with just nice and soft, just like beets really love to germinate in soil like that. But you can see in the end of December, the cattle were still out there. They ripped through that snow and got down there and ate that stuff better than you think. Go ahead and switch slides, Sean. And then we got a little video going. That's me moving the fence one night, and you can see those cattle kind of got accustomed to me moving that fence, and they just would line up right there at the pivot and just move right there with the fence. And they'd do that every night when we did that. And but so eventually we did have to remove the cattle about the middle of January. We still had feed out there, but we eventually got some snow. It was enough snow that got followed up with some rain. And then when the rain got the snow wet, it froze. And then it became difficult for the cattle to eat the stuff. But you can still see in the picture there on January 15th, we still had green brassicas. We still had a little bit of that winter barley that was green. The feed was still there. If they weren't having to fight through that snow, we'd have kept them out there. And we feel like that's probably when our daily gains that last month, they probably fell off quite a bit there. That's pretty consistent with the guys that I know that run sheep in the fall. They tell me that, the best gains are always in September and October. Then by the time you get into November, December, late in December and January, if they're still out in the field, it's almost a push. But at least at this point, we weren't buying hay yet. But so it worked out good. I think in hindsight, I would probably maybe add to the mix just a little bit of winter trit, just for a little bit more of a plant that could take some of the cold weather and still have a little bit more feed late, green stuff that they really like to eat. And obviously we needed to get on the field sooner. We didn't do anything this fall. These cattle, were intended to be sold as 8 or 9 weights last January, but that was about the time COVID started showing up and kind of wrecked the cattle market. And this fall we still owned those calves, unfortunately, and so we had to finish taking that beating before we could go buy any more. So we didn't do anything but last fall. But this fall we're going to try to follow our winter barley again with a real similar program and just try to be out there a little sooner. But that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. It's quite the experiment. A lot of good information along the way too. And I've got some more questions for you. I'll save them for later on here. Jackie, what have we got going on next?
Next, we have a video actually from the Boise State University Geosciences Club. And although the video's producer isn't here today, Amanda Rosa, hopefully I'm saying that right.
It's Rosa.
Rosa, sorry about that, is available to answer questions and entertain comments in the discussion at the end. So Sean has that video to queue up, I believe.
I do, and it's coming right up here.
Soils link us all. Hi, Hi, I'm Hannah Spiro, and I'm here today to walk you through the
Oh, sorry.
CSTI, the Community Soil Testing Initiative. I'm the president of the Geosciences Club for the 2020-2021 year. And this year we really wanted to focus on both outreach and also partnering with the community. So in the time of COVID, how can we do this? Well, I know since COVID has started, a lot more people have taken up gardening, and they are really interested in their soil and the fertilizer and if it has enough nitrates. But secondarily, how do soils connect all of us? They're beneath our feet everywhere we walk. They form the foundation below our buildings. So it's critical for not just scientists who work in the Earth, Wind, and Fire Lab or in the Department of Biology or in industry, but for the everyday citizen to understand what is my soil and why is it important? Because soils link us all. So that brings me to the CSTI, or the Community Soil Testing Initiative. We have 3 main goals. So to begin with, we start with testing. So for testing, we're focusing on 4 main things. So if I was given this bag of soil, what 4 things could we test for? First, pH. Second, we can test for nitrates. Third, we can test for the overall soil texture, soil color, and the 4th one we can test for is organic carbon. Second, we are planning to focus on the teaching side of things. How do you sample a soil? How can you test the soil? And then what are the participants' next steps in understanding the importance of their soil in the context of their lives? And our 3rd focus is on connecting with campus clubs, departments, industry professionals like you, and the Treasure Valley residents. I think through connecting, we will be able to truly form a community that is knowledgeable about soils and their importance. Well, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'm looking forward to reaching out, connecting, and talking about this new horizon.
All right, well done.
Excellent. So as I mentioned, Amanda will be available to answer questions related to the Geosciences Club at the end of the presentations. And next up, we have Tyson Coles, who's talking about striving for crop diversity. So Tyson, you can go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Let's see if I can get my screen up. Can everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I've been doing cover crops about the last 5 years on my farm. We're southeast Idaho, just east of Idaho Falls by the Ririe area. And typical crops grown in this area are wheat, barley, and alfalfa, which is what we do. There are still a lot of potatoes. I don't do any potatoes. And there's been more and more silage corn in the area and a little bit of high moisture corn. We had dairy cattle up till about 15 years ago, and then moved to beef cattle, just a cow-calf operation. And so as I've been learning more about soil health and integrating cover crops, I've actually started season-long grazing, intense rotational grazing of my cattle herd, and tried a few different things along the way. Some good, some not so good, and we're just learning. And so kind of on this first cover page, you can see my cattle grazing some season-long covers that we did out behind the house. I've got 2 small pivots, and I just quarter them and give the herd a herd of about 75 cow-calf pairs, 8 acres for between 1 to 2 days, depending on the residue and how fast they eat it down. Depends on how quickly we move them. Typically, we try to get 2 days out of it, and that's worked pretty well for us. And the picture on the bottom right, you can kind of see there, just an electric fence line was set up here, and we had just moved them out of that portion in the lower right-hand corner into the other section. But we've been typically still, aside from fall seeded cover crops and full season grazing. Bottom left, just a wheat field on our dry land, and then an alfalfa field in the middle with barley up above it. So I've been trying to figure out how I can integrate some more crops on my operation for both plant diversity, root diversity, and revenue streams. I've been looking at, for the last couple of years, different cash crops. I've looked at quinoa, buckwheat, some mustard, maybe corn or kamut. But I'm struggling to find an outlet for them. I could grow them, but I don't really have an outlet for them. I am not certified organic. There's a mill in Idaho Falls that does quinoa, but they're looking more for organic acres. They did have some acres for buckwheat, which I've thought of doing. COVID last year set that back quite a bit. They were trying to get their facilities up and ready for buckwheat. A lot of the equipment was coming from the Asian area, and so it got held up in shipping and didn't happen. At the same time, the grain elevator, where I take my wheat and barley, occasionally we do send stuff to the Portland area for the overseas market for export to Japan and stuff. And the Japan people sometimes have very high allergy to buckwheat. So concerns of any contamination from a buckwheat crop carrying over into some wheat crop has been an area that I've been trying to figure out how to work around, not trying to put any other neighbors or growers in the county, you know, in a tight spot in case, you know, Japan rejects some of the wheat from this area. So haven't got into buckwheat yet. Still looking at that one, wondering if maybe I can follow it with a year of barley and then potentially grazing behind it another year or something to try and make sure there's no seeds carrying over. But there's always the chance of it carrying through the combine as well. So mustard, the dryland stuff, I have a lot of neighbors that grow mustard, contract with Mountain State Seed in American Falls or Aberdeen. I'm not exactly sure which city they were in. For me, that one's a little more of a hindrance. It's a little farther drive, and one of my trucks would be fine making the trip, but the other truck is probably not in good a shape for an hour one-way trip. So I've been a little hesitant on the mustard, just working through logistics of trucking it farther distances. Kamut, I've tried reaching out to a couple of companies that have been using it, but have not heard anything back. So in not having much luck with other cash crops, I've been looking more into other hay mixes rather than just strictly alfalfa. And then following maybe a single season annual hay mix with some other fall grazing mixes, which I have on the next slide as well. And then one thing that I thought of this spring that I've talked to Marlon Winger with, that's on the call, is doing an interseeded legume brassica mix planted right with my wheat and barley. And so that's one thing that I'm going to be trying this year, is just mixing it all together and putting it down at the same time. I thought about flying it on in possibly June, but I figured I might get a little bit better stand and emergent weed suppression if I just planted it right with my wheat or barley crops. So the seed mix on the right hand side, I've got a crimson clover and a red clover and ladino and balanza clover. that I'll be using for some legumes, primarily there for some nitrogen fixation for the following year's crop, and then turnips and radishes as well for some taproots, and all of that to try and suppress weeds while the wheat and barley are growing. And we're doing a pretty low seeding rate. You know, as far as a cover crop mix, typically I'd be, depending on the mix, between 20 and 40 pounds to the acre. And this is my irrigated mix that I'll be doing on my irrigated wheat and barley. And so total seeding rate mixed in right with my wheat and barley in the drill is going to be just over 3.5 pounds to the, or 5.5 pounds to the acre. On the dry land, I'm going to cut that in half. So it's only going to be about 3.25 pounds to the acre that we're putting out, just making sure we don't get too many seeds per square foot when I throw in my 60 to 65 pounds of wheat or barley as I'm planting that. And then the left hand side, the mix is the summer grazing mix that I put together for my cows out here on the pivots behind my house. I've always, since I got started 5 years ago, I've been a big proponent of very diverse seed mixes. And typically I've been anywhere from 12 to 22 different varieties in my mix. I always try to throw in a few warm season grasses along with the cool seasons to get them coming later on. And then brassicas and phacelia I really like. I've got a couple neighbors that have some beehives around, and I always throw some phacelia in the mix when we have seen an increase in bees and ladybugs. And so then the legumes also for the cattle, they seem to do well in this mix. I did 1 year of, like Brian talked about with the stockers, I bought some year-old heifers and rotated them out there and bred the heifers. And when it came to time to sell the bred heifers, the market had kind of tanked. And so what I paid for those heifers and what they were bringing was very close to the same price. So we got stuck with some heifers that we couldn't market for a while. And since then, I just upped the cow-calf operation and stuck with raising calves. Up till about 5-6 weights is where I sell them. So moving to the next screen, one thing I tried last year, which I am going to be doing a little bit more of, and I'll chalk this up to Dan Lakey down in the Soda Springs area. Right in the center, the two pictures is peas and barley mixed in together, intercropped. Seed in the drill, and then on the bottom, the two plants growing together on dry land. And that did fine. You know, the barley fared just as well as any of my other monoculture barley. The peas in the dry land scenario, it seemed like they came on pretty good early while we had moisture, and then when it got a little drier throughout the course of June, they kind of tapered off a little bit. And so I only ended up with about 5% peas in my finished product, you know, as I harvested them with the combine. And I did have to separate them out later after harvest, but that's another thing I'm still working on. So intercrop peas and barley was some other way to try and get two crops off of the same acres. And then I'm looking at this year, I've got 30 acres that I will be putting in this haying mix on the left, which is, you know, spring triticale, barley, oats, and then forage pea and berseem clover. Now, the total cost on this mix is about $45 to the acre. So this is one of my more expensive mixes that I've done in anything, but I'm planting at 90 pounds to the acre. The triticale, barley, and oats mixture, I could do that for about $10 to the acre cheaper if I was just trying to raise my own hay and sell it. I'm raising everything for my own cattle here, so I will feed it off. And the berseem clover, from what I've heard from other guys, as soon as it's cut it really starts coming right back. Whereas alfalfa, a lot of times, you know, you cut it and you'll have a little bit of lag time until it gets some moisture, and then it'll start coming back. So the plan is, you know, even if I don't get a lot of triticale or barley or oats coming back, some of those peas and the berseem clover will start coming back. And then I will come in after one harvest of hay and plant this fall grazing mix on the right-hand side, with some warm season grasses, corn and millet and teff grass, along with some faba beans, and collards, kale, turnips, and radishes. A lot of those really are things that I've come to like. The cattle really enjoy eating them and do well off of them. So I threw some brassicas in that mix as well, so that hopefully the legumes will be coming back from being planted earlier in the spring, and get some of those warm season grasses coming up. I'm looking probably end of June, first part of July is when I would be drilling that, and then grazing later on into fall, into the October timeline, probably, as long as I'm, you know, rotating through grazing my alfalfa fields also. So I'm trying different things on my farm just to integrate different crop types and root structures to try and help, rather than just a back-to-back-to-back wheat, barley, alfalfa type rotation, and really get some diversity. I'm still looking for other cash crops to go as well, but right now I think the cattle and the grazing is giving me more flexibility than the other cash crops at the moment. So I did kind of change up the title a little bit on Sean. I started off crop diversity, and I changed it to more striving for farm diversity. Last year we added some laying hens, and Gabe Brown calls it the egg mobile, but a mobile chicken coop with a two-place horse trailer that we had sitting around. And the calves, early on, they were sure curious about the chickens. They hadn't seen them, and we set up a netting electric fence around them until they got used to the trailer and laying. And then we tried rotating them around behind the cattle to clean up the fly larvae and stuff, and help with our overall animal health there. And so we're looking more at that, and adding other animals. At this point, we're not there yet. We'll see kind of where this goes, but I'm always open to what's gonna help the overall health of my animals and crops. And just threw in some more pictures of the grazing the cover crops. We've had some good years of good, thick, lush cover crop that the cows move into every other day. And we've had a couple of years of it's been a little more sparse, and fighting some more of the native grasses coming in and competing with some of those cover crop mixes. So we're trying to address that a little bit this year and work through. But on the last slide, there's me and my young family up on the dry land on Antelope Flats, and my contact information if anybody wants it. And that's all I've got for you.
All right, super. Thanks, Tyson. That's a lot of stuff you've tried. You're becoming a wealth of knowledge and experience for cover crops, I would think. You're like a resource guy out there. I wouldn't be surprised.
We're experiencing a lot, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Jackie, I think we've got just is Jason.
Yeah, so we have one more presentation, one more 5 for 5 before we move on to discussion and Q&A session. So Jason Webb will be talking last about conservation challenges in hilly terrain that he's been doing. So Jason, go ahead.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. And is my screen up there?
Screen is not up there yet.
Okay.
There you go. Looks like it's coming
All right.
now. Excellent.
Okay, so I'll try and make this quick. You know, everybody else has done such a good job presenting. I'm kind of feeling like I don't really need to, but so just a quick background on me. I'm from here in Raft River, Idaho, and different than most people around that grow these same crops. I've got some hills I deal with. Hopefully there's some people that can kind of take something from this that also farm hills. The crops I grow: sugar beets, potatoes, silage, corn, alfalfa, and wheat. When I first came back to the farm after college, I wanted to take a different approach than we'd been taking, something more sustainable and something that was going to continually improve the soils. And it's kind of become a necessary thing for us. We do a lot of earth moving on our farm to be able to farm sugar beets and potatoes and some of the other crops. And one of the issues that we run into is we get down to this white dirt, and the white dirt, when it hits water, it just kind of dissolves. And that's what that upper right picture is. It actually was just a gopher hole, and water went down there and just started creating a channel, and it just disappears. And so we started implementing some cover crops and some different conservation ideas to try and save some of that soil, keep it from washing away. Let's see if I can go on here. So we started implementing cover crops about 2015. And initially when we started, I just would have it spread on with fertilizer, and it worked okay. But the issue we ran into was we weren't getting a lot of that seed to germinate. And so I had this sunflower 6830 high-speed disc that we had, and I had an old aerator fertilizer bin. And so I mounted it on top and tied it into my Trimble to be able to plant that cover crop, and saved one pass across the field. And what I've done is after every wheat crop, I'll just go in with that, and that's kind of what we've done. And it's a quick way to put down cover crop. The first couple of years, I just did kind of a winter triticale, ryegrass, and radish. And I have since diversified more, I guess, and added more in. So this bottom left picture is of the cover crop that I seeded with that rig this last year in August, and it came up great. One of the issues that we find when we go into plant corn, or especially with sugar beets with a shallow depth of planting, is if I use ryegrass, then I run into issues of too much mat and getting good seed to soil contact when I go into plant the next spring. So I've gone away in the fields I'm going in with beets. I just put down more of the leafy crops, less grass. This picture in the middle is airplane seeded cover crop, and it was flown on in June 12th to 15th. And I flew it on right after I dam or diked before I watered, so that any of the water could kind of get the seed down into the soil. And I was really happy with how well it did. It really created a good stand out there inside that corn. And I guess the main reason I do all of it is more earthworms and better soil structure and better soil fertility, better water permeability. And it's definitely shown in earthworm populations. So everybody else has kind of covered a lot of the different seeds and the different cover crop varieties that people use. And this is the main one that I use now, with the ryegrass being somewhat selective. And I seed anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds as well. And then just 2018, I decided to try some no-till out, and the planter that I had, there was no way to make it work to be able to get down to the depths that we needed for corn. And so I bought a precision planter and kind of put it together with the help of Progressive Crop Systems, and it's been great. You know, this is some of the stuff that we've seeded into. This 5-year-old alfalfa was definitely a challenge. I had to make sure that my tank was full of seed, or else it would still lift the planter out of the ground with the hydraulic down pressure. But it ended up being a great stand of corn, and did really well. And then this bottom left picture is the Triticale. And then we do a lot of strip till with sugar beets and corn. And with that planter, I put some smart firmers on just to kind of get an idea of where my organic matter was sitting, and some of the improvements that I was seeing on that. And this is just one of the fields. This is kind of just a small bench that goes along in the valley, and this was planted in a circle. And I just thought it was impressive how well it picks up that organic matter the difference between those two soil layers, and the difference that it's seen over those years. So we started out with kind of a problem. We were losing a lot of soil, a lot of fertility. Had to go in and fill in holes and ditches every year, and most of that has gone away by reducing tillage and planting cover crop and doing some of the no-till and strip till stuff that we've been able to do. We've been able to eliminate a lot of that washout and wasting of fertilizer or loss of fertilizer. And we've also started a composting program, and it's always kind of been in the mix, but it's become more organized, I guess. Through that, we've been able to reduce a lot of the commercial fertilizer usage. I don't know that we'll ever completely get away from that, but it's definitely gone down. And with the price of P&K this year, it's probably a good thing I don't have to put quite as much on. So anyway, if there's any questions on anything I've done, feel free to ask, and we'll go from there. But that's all I've got.
That's a great talk. Going from earth moving and land leveling to utilization of cover crops and compost, and seeing soil structure improvements. And yeah, there's a lot going on there. Thank you. Jackie, I think we've got comments and questions. Do you want to take those from the top?
Yeah, absolutely. I will just kind of move through in the order that the questions were asked, which kind of corresponds to the order of the presenters. So there's a question about cover crop germination based on Cooper's talk, but I think we have enough folks in the room here who could probably help to answer this question or kind of brainstorm around it. The question was, would the cover crop germinate faster if the seed was flown on before cultivation? And if I remember correctly from talking to Cooper, I do believe for the second time around, they did fly it on before cultivating and did seem to have a higher germination rate. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to say or experience on that front to share.
Maybe just oh, sorry. Real quick, what I did is I flew it on after dammer diking. I don't know how many people dammer dike, but before I watered. So after dammer diking and before the first watering, it creates a pretty loose soil structure, and then as the water turns on, it kind of covers that seed up.
This is Marlon. One of my thoughts with Cooper was because he's organic, he has to use tillage for weed control, and so he has to put on the cover crop after he's already cultivated ones.
And it actually looks like Cooper is on, and I just put him in as a panelist. So Cooper, if you had anything to share on that, that would be awesome. Not to put you on the spot, but kind of to put you on the spot.
Can you guys hear me? Thumbs up, Jackie?
Yes, you are good.
Better late than never, maybe.
Excellent.
Hey, yeah, so to answer your question, we've done it both ways. We have cultivated and then flown seed on, turned the pivot on, and we have flown seed on, cultivated, and then watered. When we've done trials it doesn't seem to make a difference, but it's just more about when the airplane can show up versus when we are cultivating and have the chance to jump in the tractor. We do like to incorporate seed though. We don't like to feed the birds because we already have plenty of opportunities for them to eat seed. So we do try to bury our seed with a cultivator.
Awesome. Glad we caught you for that one, Cooper. Appreciate it. The next question was for Zena about the PK farm and cattle. And the question was, what was in the 5 seed mix? And maybe what were some of the observations about the species in that mix in general?
Yeah, so the 5 species in that mix were, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I get it right, but it was like oats, triticale, radish, sunflower, and crimson clover. And I think that in that trial, I think that the Robert was thinking that it just added the same amount of biomass when they sampled across all of the different mixes. It was sort of the same amount of biomass as the 11-way mix, and it was cheaper cost per acre. And so that was his sort of preference at the end of the season. And I can type that in the Q&A too, so if folks want to be able to see that after, I'll type that in there.
You know, that's kind of a contrast from what we were hearing from Tyson Coles. I'm wondering, Tyson, if you've got a comment on that and what, because I took note of your comment there that over time you've become a proponent of greater diversity, and I'm kind of wondering, you know, how you arrived at that and some of your thoughts.
A lot of it has stemmed from gleaning more information from the soil health workshops that I attend, YouTube videos that I watch of some of the other regenerative agriculture practitioners that have been doing it a lot longer than I have felt like they've just benefited more from it. So I've kind of tried to not have to reinvent the wheel on my own farm and go off with some of the more experienced people that have been doing it longer, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. It's one thing to hear someone employing more diversity in their production operation. That's different than reading up on like the Zena experiment. I don't know if you've ever looked that up, but huge trials in biodiversity, and you know, a lot of their results would indicate that there's additional benefits to be had from additional diversity. So thanks.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all, Sean. I think that, you know, in that case, Robert's going from a monoculture barley field to something with 5 different species. So I think he's saying like, hey, progress over perfection, right? Like this worked this year, and was a little bit cheaper and was a little bit simpler. And so maybe in a few years, he'd love to have, you know, 13 different species, but 5 is better than 1.
Yeah, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I hear you and agree with you.
This is Marlon. I got about 10,000 comments, but I'll try to keep them down a little bit. One comment with the PK ranch, and we've seen this on large operations as your cover crop matures, and if you need to stop that maturity, we've had pretty good luck with some producers being able to swath graze it, so they can stop maturity with a swather. Now that costs you money, and maybe that wasn't something he was trying to keep out of, but that's an option. And yeah, that's always a challenge when you start making more diverse mixes. It's pretty easy to get your price per acre a little out of whack. So you gotta kind of keep that seeding rate down and keep that rate down a little bit, or it's pretty easy to get the cost up. But in my opinion, the hardest principle for farmers to implement of the 5 principles of soil health is plant diversity. But I believe it's very important in our push our ecosystem services further.
Thanks for that, Marlon.
Excellent. So moving forward a little bit, kind of getting more into details on species, there was a question for you, Brian. Someone noticed the rutabaga in your mix and was curious about why you included that. It's maybe a less common cover crop to include, and maybe adding on to that, what benefits you saw from using rutabaga in the mix.
Well, rutabaga was just mostly selected. We were trying to stockpile as much feed as we could as late into the fall as we could. Rutabaga just has a high rating of cold tolerance and what it can provide, what it can hold up to, and then even after the cold temperatures, what feed value remained even after it started to get completely froze. And so that was the reason behind that. And we tried to read up on as much as we could, because there are some plants that just once they start to freeze and some of the leaves dry out, the cattle just don't find them palatable, and they won't even eat them at all, and let alone it's not doing them any good. So rutabaga is just it was the highest rating. It's the only time we've ever planted it, so I can't say. And I'll be honest with you, when it comes to having that and that purple top turnips, when some of the stuff gets a lot older, I can tell the difference between the two. But like that one slide in my presentation in January of that plant that's still green, I'm not really even sure which one of the brassicas that was, if that was the rutabaga or if that was one of the radishes. The radish and the mustard we put in, we were going to sugar beets the next year, and one of our covered crop seed salesmen really kind of specializes in some of those nematode trap and crops like that help with your controlling nematodes and beets the next year. So that's why we selected some of those. But yeah, rutabaga was exclusively to try to provide some more feed value late in the year.
Yeah, I've got a question for Brian, as long as we've got him talking here. You had mentioned how good that soil felt in hand after the cover crops, and I think you were going into beets. And I was curious how your season went, and if what your yield was good. You felt like that was kind of the benefit was obvious in the yield and the plant health.
Yeah, we actually, to be honest with you, we were pretty nervous about taking this, letting it go all through the winter and going into sugar beets. Sugar beets we're trying to get those planted pretty early, and when there's a lot of moisture, it can cause some issues. And we used tillage. We dissed it, roll harrowed it, and planted it. And in the springtime, I can tell you, the first day we went there, it was too wet, and we pulled the disc in there, and we were just pulling up big, long, slick mud balls that long, and said, well, okay, let's stop, let's leave, and move to another field. And we came back and it was only a matter of days. It was like 3 days later is all, but we had a few sunny days, and we came back to that field, and it worked up a lot less cloddy. And but I think I mentioned to you earlier, we also had a lot of those radishes overwintered, and they actually started growing again in those sugar beets. And the ground was really, really mellow, and the sugar beets loved it. We had almost a perfect stand of sugar beets in those, and that's really, really key when it comes to sugar beets, planting them the first time and getting them like that. but the ground was so mellow that we were extremely worried about it blowing. But with some of that, the plants, the residue that was left, there wasn't really a lot, there was less than you think, and them volunteer radishes that came back the next year, last spring when we had some of those 40 and 50-mile-an-hour windstorms and our neighbors' beets were getting blown out. I think those volunteer radishes actually saved us, and then we killed them with the Roundup, really easy. But that's probably a top 3 ever crop on our farm for sugar beets. They were phenomenal. We haven't seen the results yet. I'm sure they were top beets at our station. So they, getting them off to that good start early, they really like the conditions, and really, for the people I work with and some of the other decision makers on our farm, we're probably going to try to plant a cover crop mix on everything that's going out of grain and going into sugar beets next year on all of our acres. That's probably convinced us. We did one other field that got grazed with sheep last year, and those beets, they were fantastic as well. They weren't as good as these ones, but they were still the best crop that particular farm has ever produced. So we're kind of sold on the idea of there's something to it. We're probably not. You have a way better handle on what's going on there with the microbiology than we do. We just see the results, and we'll keep trying to repeat them.
Awesome, thank you.
Just a question for Brian. Have you got any royalty checks yet, Brian?
From who? Who should I be asking?
Well, last I saw, they viewed over 10,000 people have viewed your movie clips. So I just wondering if they're sending you money yet.
No,
not yet.
Why don't you work on that for me yet?
Okay, I'll try to do that.
So we had a couple of kind of related questions, one in the Q&A and one in the comments for Tyson regarding the grasses in both the hay and pasture. So I'm going to bring up both of those questions, Tyson. I know you answered one of them in the chat, but it wasn't visible to everyone. So I'd like if you could talk to both of those maybe together. So one question was about the grass base in your rotational pastures, so the ones that you're actually moving animals through. And then the other question was, what is your target vegetative stage for your hay mix? What species are you kind of keying in on or focusing on? So if you could talk a little bit to your species mix and what your focus is, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so the key grass family plant that's in both of those mix is Triticale. I've come to really like it for the tonnage and regrowth. Comes back really well after the cows graze it. Gets up and going early. Oats has been pretty good in there as well, with the annual grazing. But I just feel that Triticale's done the best job for us for biomass and palatability and regrowth and everything. So that's been one of the key crops that's been in every one of my mixes is Triticale. So and it overwinters well in this area also. I've done it in my fall seeding cover crop mixes after wheat or barley, and it does well. Sometimes going back into a wheat or barley, it has been apparent that crop is still there and growing also. So, but being a grass family plant, I can't spray it out later on in the year. But Triticale is definitely the one that I like the best for my base.
I've got an additional question for Tyson. Tyson, you mentioned Phacelia in your mixes and pollinator benefits there. I also wonder if you see having some flowering plants in your cover crops any reduced pest pressure, and I'm thinking in terms of like beneficial predatory insects that might be useful. And if I guess for anyone that's utilizing cover crops, if they think that's a thing?
Yeah, I really haven't seen a whole lot of aphids around as much. We definitely get a lot more lady beetles, and honeybees. There's just been a lot more insects overall. We go out with the cattle every day as we're watering them and calving, and so we're right in the middle of that all the time, and there are just a lot more insects in general. So I feel they definitely have been a benefit keeping at least one or two of those pollinators in there. And then just Barry also asked the question, no perennial grasses used. To this point, no. The cattle have been grazing basically on the same field. I replant it every year. We're trying to work through logistically on some of my brother's ground to be able to get it to where we could shift the cattle over and rotate them on that ground and put mine back to wheat or barley production. And that was one thing I thought. I didn't intend it to continue to be a year after year thing. Otherwise, I may have put some perennials in there. I've been reading up more now. They've got some perennial wheat varieties that they've been working on that if we are able to move it over to my brother's fields and do a similar thing, I would probably try to put some perennials in there along with it, just to help with the seed cost and not have to just redo that every year. So.
And Sean, to answer your question on pollinators, in our practices, we have added buckwheat to our potatoes. We've flown on buckwheat into potatoes and then cultivated that in. And that is to attract a variety of insects, to diversify the insect community in the field, because we really want to try to reduce the pressure of Colorado potato beetle in our fields. And we're trying to do that by bringing in other crops or other things that will host a different variety of insects. And we've also planted a mix of spring peas, chickling vetch, and buckwheat into potatoes. Before they broke the ground, we went back over the top of the potatoes and planted directly into the row, into the hill, that three-way mix, and that turned out pretty well. As far as quantifying the effects, couldn't tell you, but it sure looks pretty.
Yeah, that's why I like the clovers in there. They always look pretty too. My kids like to go pick the crimson clover.
It looks like we're gonna lose Jason Webb, but if he's still on, I do have Jason. Do you have time to answer just one quick question?
Sure. Yep.
You had shown a graphic of a pivot, and you were talking about sensors that you had, and that graphic was indicative of organic matter at the surface. I believe I was trying to manage a couple of things, and I did not get all of that, and I'm interested.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so it's just I guess a feature on the precision planting. This is an actual screenshot of my monitor on my precision planter, and each row. Well, so I've got my planter split into doubles, so there's 6 sensors across the back here, and instead of using a Keaton firmer to firm the seed down, it's called a smart firmer, and it detects organic matter, temperature, soil moisture, and essentially how clean the soil is, so whether you're planting into residue or not. And this is the metric that just shows the organic matter content in that soil. So it's essentially like running a skid through a field, except it's mounted to your planter, so you don't have to run back through it again.
A lot of useful information. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Hey, I have a question for Tyson. Tyson, when you plant 17 or 20 pounds of forage peas in your mix, does it make you pucker for the price?
Yeah, a little bit. I was wondering about that one. I was hoping, and I'll find out next year maybe. I was hoping to get some nitrogen fixing for the following year's crop is really what it's there for.
So my question is, if it makes you pucker, to buy those peas, why don't you grow your own source?
I've got some that I mixed with that barley from last year, so I probably should. That'd be a good thing to do.
But some of our soil health innovators in North Dakota are growing their own cover crop mixes now. Maybe a simple 6-way mix.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, this is making me a ton of money because I'm not spending buku dollars on these expensive peas, for example. So
yeah, and I've actually been thinking about some of that the last couple of months as I've been putting some of these mixes together. Maybe letting some of them go full term and harvesting them for a base mix to start with or something, but haven't gotten to that point yet.
I know Cameron Williams in Grace areas a couple of years ago grew his own peas, and he's been, I think, putting more peas in his mixes because he's not puckering anymore.
Yeah. Well, to this point, I've been pulling the peas out of my grazing mixes. The cows don't seem to favor them as well as they do others. And most of those have been an Austrian winter peas that I put in my fall mixes or the grazing. But the peas that I was growing with the barley was a spring variety Banner, and I didn't want to have any leftover Austrian winter peas getting mixed in with those Banners, so I've been kind of pulling the peas out initially, but I figured where this was going to be cut and dried down and baled for hay, I'd put it back in.
So Tyson, I had a pea breeder from where, I can't remember where he was from, northern Idaho or something. He told me that white blossom peas are more palatable than purple blossom peas. So
that probably would make sense. The Banners actually are a white blossom, and the Austrians were a purple blossom. So maybe I'd just switch everything over to those Banners and get rid of the Austrians.
I asked him why. He says because there's more. I forgot the name of it. Forgot it. But there's less of this negative property in the white blossom peas than there are the purple blossom peas. So,
maybe I'll have to look into that one.
Marlon, my pea supply has run out, so if Tyson wants to raise me some Arvicas, I'll buy them from him. So
I know.
I looked at getting Arvicas, but I wasn't sure where to sell them for a marketable crop. That's why I went with the Banners. But if I'm using them for my own use, that might be good. I knew you liked Arvicas, Cameron.
Yeah, for forage peas, they're the best ones I found. And then I asked Jason that same question, why he's using winter peas on his mix instead of spring peas. But I don't know if he's still on.
My guess is, Cameron, because it's the easiest pea available, to buy is the Austrian, but.
So he's off, but I actually do see his response. He answered that question, Cameron, before he left. He said, primarily because that's what I had available, but also because I grazed cows through the winter, and the winter peas seems to do better once the weather turns cold. But maybe spring peas are something I should look into.
My experience is spring peas will give him a lot more forage quantity than winter peas. That's at least what I've seen. So. And I don't know why we haven't built a pea market somewhere in eastern Idaho, Tyson, because we can grow them well, we just can't get rid of them. So.
Yep. Well, maybe we'll have to try and figure out a venture there or something.
Well, just send them over to us. We use Arvicas and Austrians both as much as we can. And I'd concur with Cameron that the Arvicas, even planted in mid-August, will provide more fall forage for grazing than an Austrian. But we've used both successfully at both ends of the season, given certain conditions.
Well, and that's what these webinars are good for, is all of the getting to know new people and connections and everything. So that might be something to look at, Cooper.
You bet. Welcome the discussion.
Hey, Cameron or Cooper, are those spring peas, are they a larger size seed itself? That was one of the things that we kind of ran into with some that we did before. and we don't usually drill them. We usually will broadcast and try to work stuff up. But the spring peas we've had in the past, they tend to stay up on top of the ground. You can't keep them wet enough to get them to germ well. And the Austrians, just because they're a little bit smaller, tend to kind of handle that a little better. But I would be interested in that just because our goal is better feed.
Yeah, in our experience, I think you're right. The spring peas are a little bit bigger. We pretty much exclusively drill peas in, and even when you do that, the pigeons show up the next day. They'll find them.
I thought they floated to the top. I didn't know the pigeons dug for them. But the Arvicas are not really big seed. They're probably a medium pea.
So I think that is all the questions that we had in the Q&A so far, but feel free to continue to bring them in.
Can I ask Tyson another question?
Of course.
Sure.
On your oats, everleaf oats, are you going to figure to cut them that way mature, and that's going to be what grows back? Because that will take a lot longer to mature than triticale or barley.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to let it all go fairly mature. But my thoughts, I guess, just was in there for a little bit of a mixture, better variety for the cows. As far as regrowth, whatever has a seed and can drop, or even just regrowth after it's cut from the established root, that's fine. I was mainly looking for the probably the Berseem clover to stay in there and come back along with the fall seeded warm season mix that I was planning on drilling afterwards.
Initially, I thought the everleafs were a bad idea because they would be so slow to mature. But if you cut it with the triticale, they ought to regrow really nicely where they haven't got reproductive. So I changed my opinion after I thought about it.
And I'm getting all my seed from AgriSource this year. I've been primarily green cover, but AgriSource was right there on price, and they're a lot closer. And the everleaf was kind of the variety they threw in there, so I just left it that way. I'm not familiar enough with different varieties of oats to really be that selective myself, I guess.
You could cheapen that up, not using everleafs because they're so expensive, but they are a nice oat.
Well, I just, again, looking for forage and stuff, I figured it was probably, oats were probably a good thing to put in there. And I could probably put a different variety in, but that'll probably be a learning experience, I guess, this year.
There's another comment from Barry in the crowd that his experience with everleaf oats is that they seem to hold a lot of moisture in the actual plant as well. Not sure if that's something that other folks have seen or have grown it, but.
One thing that I've seen over my last 5 or 7 years of soil health and cover crops is we seem to know a lot about turnips and radishes, but there's a whole bunch of cover crops that we're not very familiar with. And I've often thought that's one thing we need to do in some of our regions of Idaho is plant 15 of these cover crops of the ones that we're not familiar with. Something we need to look at a regional basis.
An interesting question that Shauna brought up and I hadn't really thought about this, but the anthocyanins that give the blossom color, is that what the cows seem to dislike in the pink versus the white blossom peas?
No, I think it's the terpenes that it was some, but I'm not sure because it's not coming to my mind. What's the chemical in sandfoin and bird's foot trefoil that reduces bloat? What do we call that? I think it was the heavy terpenes that reduces the palatability. Nobody can remember? What is it in bird's foot trefoil that reduces bloat, that brings the frothy bloat down in the rumen?
Brad Johnson just chimed in and said it was the tannin.
Tannin level, that's right. So
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, Brad, you're right on it. It's the tannins. It's the tannins that are higher in purple blossom peas than the forage peas. And now I remember the plant breeder said, look, that's why we selected forage peas over Austrian winter peas, because it's a forage pea. It's something that cattle will graze, where the Austrian pea was more of a grain type pea. Also, somebody asked in the question, did Boise State University do a Haney test? And I'm pretty sure they don't. But there is a new company, Regen Labs in Nebraska, that's a break off of Ward Labs, who's now running Haney tests.
Yeah, I'm sorry we missed the BSU folks dropped off. I was going to ask how folks that were, that had seen that video, they were interested in getting involved and getting their soil sampled. How do they get involved with them and get a little more information from them?
And is it a free service, Sean, or does it cost money?
Well, that's just it. I didn't get the chance to ask, and I realized that they've dropped off. So I'll have to get back to the group later.
I do see in Amanda's comment, so she replied to Brad's question about whether the BSU lab performs Haney tests, and they don't currently, but they're hoping to maybe expand their capacity. But she did say at the end, while still keeping the initiative free to the community. So it does sound like it's a free service they offer, but again, probably something to look more in depth at through their website directly.
And I think all the burning questions I had, I've posed to the group. Maybe I was going to ask Cooper about the seeding rates on the 44 versus the other, and if you, having done what you did, if you think you've got a good idea of how that would have gone to your favor on those wider rows, a different seeding rate.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to clarify that. I'm sure it was a little bit confusing in my presentation. I was moving fast and I didn't treat it well. We were just really trying to mirror work that had been done elsewhere years ago, actually here in the Magic Valley, but also more recently, in places like the Midwest and other places on grain corn, doing alternate row spacing on grain corn. And I think, we, in our case, we aimed for double the plant population, per row foot, maintaining the same plant population per acre, of course. But as I said, that didn't really work out. And I think if we'd gone to, instead of doubling it, gone to 75%, we might have done better. I know that those plants in the 44-inch rows were just too close. They were too thirsty, too stressed on hot days. You could just visibly see it. And as the forage quality data showed, they just didn't mature as well. They were behind all season, to be honest. So there were some limiting factors there. I think we just had too many plants per inch, and reducing that by some amount, probably to at least 25% would be fine. And I I'm sure there's somebody else who's figured this out somewhere, and I just didn't quite do all the homework I should have before we quickly dashed in there and finished off the field in the last couple acres on that trial plot. Does that answer your question, Sean?
Yes, now that I've unmuted myself, yes, it does. Thank you, Cooper.
Sean, can I chime back in for a second?
Yeah, you bet.
I just had a question posed to me over the chat. Said he can't seem to ask questions, but Steve Schuler, I believe, in the Twin Falls area, asked if I could talk a little bit about success with clover over in my area with shorter growing season. So as far as the clovers go, I've had them in fall planted mixes, spring planted mixes. And crimson clover, it seems like it's been one, even in my fall planting mixes, for whatever reason. I don't know if the seed's lying dormant till spring, but I'll see some crimson clover seem to overwinter into the next year. And so it's been the stuff I graze annually. It always seems like it's some of the first stuff that comes back. I believe crimson's supposed to be an annual, so I don't know if it's getting some of it up late in the year that's going to seed and then it's laying dormant. But it seems like in the springtime, before I'm really turning the cows in, it's up and going, and I've got a lot of nice little red clover heads there staring at me. And the ladinos and berseem, I haven't really done anything with to this point. There's a guy in Hamer, kind of north of us, just straight up I-15, that did some berseem. Justin Place, I think, is who it was, that did it kind of as a rotational crop between wheat and barley, rather than just alfalfa, because it wasn't a perennial. And he seemed to really like it, and that's the one that said that it came back as soon as he started cutting. So getting it dried down and baled was something that he fought a little bit. So I'm kind of trying the berseem off of that, and the ladino and the red clovers and stuff in my interseeded mix. I'm kind of doing for just lower height legumes, so that I can come in and harvest my wheat and barley over the top of it and not really have any interference there with the actual barley or wheat crop. I guess hopefully that answers your question there.
Jackie, I think we made it through all the questions in the chat and the Q&A.
Yeah, I believe we have.
Okay. I was just seeing we're getting on to 2 hours, and these always go longer than I think they're going to go, but I cannot, you can't beat the discussion. So, but so I was going to say, if anyone has a burning question they've yet to ask, this would be a great time. Otherwise, I think for the sake of time, and everyone's got plenty of stuff to do, we should consider wrapping this one up. So if anybody's got a burning question, fire away. All right, well, hearing none, I just want to say thanks to everyone for tuning in and for contributing. This has been a fantastic discussion, a lot of good information presented, a lot of good people here, and couldn't ask for anything better. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for making this happen.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for
Thanks
your
for organizing.
encouragement and providing the venue.